3 units. It was totally bombed out, vacant, no roof, no windows, nothing. We bought it for $5,000, invested about $230,000. A year into it, kind of quit my job, started doing that full time. So it was most days just, walking or driving up to the building, working all day and then going home. And it turned out great. I think we sometimes look back and like, how did we do such a nice job on the first one?
Welcome to the Real Estate 101 podcast. I'm your host today, Patrick Donley, and with me today is a fellow Ohioan doing interesting things with historic tax credits, John Blatchford. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here today. You're down in Cincinnati. I'm up in Columbus. But to start off, we're going to do a deep dive for sure into historic credits, historic tax credits, and some of the interesting renovations you've done in the Over the Rhine region in Cincinnati. But before we get into that, I wanted to hear a little bit about your younger years, just what growing up was like for you. Did your family talk about money, investing in real estate growing up? And also if you had any entrepreneurial side hustles as a kid.
Yeah, so I'm from upstate New York, near Albany, a city called Amsterdam. It's about 12,000 people, kind of an old mill town, rugs and gloves and stuff like that. But yeah, my parents were, my mom was still working. My parents, thankfully, still around, and they're kind of, public servants, most of their life for the state government. So yeah, there wasn't really any business, entrepreneur, real estate, anything that's, I would say, part of my childhood. But my great grandfather was a mason. Actually, my grandma was an entrepreneur. She owned a nursing home that she basically started herself, and it became family business with my aunts. So I think it was in my genes, if not maybe directly from my parents or immediate family. So yeah, it was a great childhood. And then I went to undergrad in Binghamton, SUNY Binghamton, and then grad school in Cincinnati. And really the first sort of like side hustle business, we started a company in Binghamton my senior year. That was, the idea was basically to sell textbooks on campus. So, quarter ends, you have all these books, you could just directly sell it to someone else. So I'm sure that exists now, but I actually think the idea was pretty good, but we didn't know what we were doing. And the website, it was great, but after maybe a year, just kind of all moved out.
And what was that called? Text Link? That was the business?
Yeah. So we all kind of scraped together, worked summers, got a website built. And it was a great website. You could just search by the ISBN, now 15 years ago.
Wow.
And find any book. So yeah, it was cool. It was fun.
And you made a little money doing it, didn't you?
No, we launched a website. I think maybe we got to like 5 users. I think some people started using it, but we all moved to separate cities. Yeah.
And what year was that?
Yeah, probably like 2009 to 11.
And then what did you end up studying at Binghamton? Did you have a clear career path that you wanted to pursue, or was real estate kind of always lurking in the background as an idea that you wanted to end up doing?
Yeah, so I think in high school, I took an architectural drafting class, and that got in my mind that I wanted to be an architect. And there's always something there of like, I like buildings and cities, and I didn't really know what that would look like. So I wanted to be an architect. But, eventually I applied a bunch of places, business, engineering, pharmacy, architecture. But I got into the engineering school at Binghamton. So that's what I did. And eventually did industrial engineering. So industrial and systems, the ideal job is probably like logistics for Amazon or something. So yeah, that was the path. But then pretty soon after I graduated, I went to get an MBA because I thought, I don't think I want to be an engineer. So thought I wanted to get more in the business world.
Did you work right out of undergrad? Did you take a job, or did you go right directly to go get an MBA?
Yeah, I had internships. I worked at a restaurant in the summers, and then I got an internship at IBM. But pretty much as soon as I graduated, took the summer and then went right to grad school. Okay.
And you ended up at the University of Cincinnati, which is where you're at now. What was that MBA program like? Was it useful to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So 2-year program. And I think the best part, and probably, college in general, is the connections you're making. So met a lot of really great people that I'm still friends with, including from around the world. I think it opened up my mind there. Met a lot of people from India and Europe and China, Taiwan. So yeah, but the program was good. I think it was kind of general, I guess, as an MBA program is, learning accounting and finance and frankly, Excel ended up being quite useful. And they actually had a real estate focus. And I thought that meant selling single family homes, becoming a real estate agent. So I didn't do that. And I focused on information systems. I thought I would have a more like tech software startup path.
And so going into the MBA program, were you pretty clear that you wanted to do something entrepreneurial, or did you think you'd pursue more of a corporate path?
I think it was mixed. I had already technically started a company, but yeah, I think I was interested I started programming. I had an internship in grad school and I learned, the basics of building a website. And so I thought I would go more to that path, tech company. Maybe eventually start my own company. But I think my idea at that time was to work in like a startup environment.
And so you graduated from the MBA program. What year would that have been?
Yeah, 2012.
2012. And then you worked a little bit after that before starting your company, Kunst, which we're going to get into. What was your first job right out of the MBA program?
So it was a very small software company based in Germany. And then Cincinnati was like their US headquarters. It was a strong German presence in Cincinnati, the Chamber of Commerce. And so there's maybe 7 of us in the Cincinnati office, and there's manufacturing software. So we would connect to a CNC machine, could tell you when it's breaking down or what the error codes were. I worked there for 2 years. Part of that was really amazing. Got to travel all around the world and have it paid for by the company and all that good stuff. Learned a lot, and learned a lot in project management, all that. But probably a year into working there, started looking at our first property and bought it for maybe like 18 months into working there. So it was, at the time it was just going to be a side thing. I just, again, like buildings, architecture, all that. And so started on the real estate path, I guess.
So tell more about that. Tell us about the building you bought, how much it cost. The area that you're in is very interesting. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, you're familiar maybe with, Over the Rhine, but I guess for anybody that's not, it's this kind of beautiful historic district in downtown Cincinnati. It's one of the largest historic districts in the country. It has, hundreds of contributing buildings. So it's what you can imagine like this beautiful old, kind of like human scale neighborhood to be. And so I started discovering it in grad school, but really once I graduated, I moved down there. The weekend I moved in, it was this great like music festival and just surrounded by beautiful historic buildings. Like, oh my God, it's the best. So, I just kind of fell in love with the neighborhood and the people there, and came across the first building, which at that time, 2013, 14, kind of a little bit after the Great Recession and the arc of Over the Rhine, like property was still very cheap. So it's a $5,000 building, kind of this beautiful corner building in what is still kind of a tough area in Over the Rhine, but just knew that, I could kind of figure that out. And we did. So 3 units, it was totally bombed out, vacant, no roof, no windows, nothing. So we bought it for $5,000, invested, about about $230,000, and that was it.
So how many square feet was that? It was 3 units. Were you living in Over the Rhine at that time, or was it just like an area you loved and kind of on a lark, you decided to spend $5,000 on this building? Like, what's the worst case scenario, right? Like, how bad could it be? Was that your thought process?
Yeah. I mean, basically, I can figure this out. I can, we actually raised money in that first project. I had saved some, but, we needed to raise an additional like $50,000, which, was a lot. So that ended up being like 12 people, average $5,000 investment, like 500 up to 20,000. And so I lived in Over the Rhine. The building was like fairly close. So a lot of days, the first year I was working full time. So, after work and on the weekends, just go there. And, we were a general contractor. So we were kind of hiring everybody. I had some help. Friends of mine that had done a bit of construction. And then, basically a year into it, kind of quit my job and started doing that full time. So it was most days just, walking or driving up to the building, working all day and then going home.
So what do you think, what was it that you first got the real estate bug? What was it that attracted you to real estate?
Yeah, I think to start, it was much more romantic. Just like, this is a beautiful building. It's 150 years old and hasn't been lived in for 30 plus years, 50 years at that point. So it just was cool and it was interesting. And basically my wife now and I just loved it. And so we were working there every day, and it was just kind of a beautiful thing. And I didn't think that much. I mean, I knew Excel, I took finance classes, I knew enough to like run the numbers, but it was just probably 80% just like romantic. I think this is cool kind of thing.
Was it an all brick building then?
Yep. All brick building, 3 stories, kind of the original, all of our buildings, basically, masonry, exterior, old roof, wood joists, and then, wood flooring on top. And we restored, in 2 of the units, it's the original floors. And a bunch, we kept a lot of the original windows, original doors, the original cornice, which, I basically painted on a genie lift. So, and it turned out great. I think I sometimes look back, I'm like, how did we do such a nice job on the first one?
So were you doing like your own demo? Were you sounded like you were subbing out a lot of the work, but were you doing as much of it as you can? Were you like refinishing your own hardwood floors? Were you repairing masonry? Anything like that?
Yeah. So, electric, plumbing, HVAC, the roof, that was all subbed out. And then, we hired people kind of here and there as we didn't have the money or just were interested to do the work, we would do it. So, we did like all the cabinets and counters. We restored the floors. I'm saying like, and my wife, and then we hired, basically like 3 laborers. And so it was kind of just the crew of us there every day to get stuff done.
So what was it that allowed you to quit your job? Had you saved up a bunch at that point from your work, or what was it that gave you the confidence to leave your W-2 job to pursue this, because it was just one building at that point, right? I'm just kind of interested about the thought process of how you decided to leave your W-2.
Yeah, it didn't really make sense. And looking back, I'm not sure, I would do it the same way. It was basically like 25. And I had some savings, so basically put it all into this building. So like financially, it wasn't a smart thing. And it was just, I think I was annoyed enough with the job that I wanted to quit. And I was as interested enough as I could be in the real estate that I was like, okay, this makes sense. Like, I'll just do this full time. But it wasn't very like wise. Okay, I have savings and I've done 5 buildings and now I'm ready. It's like, I just like, I don't want to work here anymore and I want to do building. But it should work out in the end, but it wasn't like that well thought out, I'd say.
Were you married at the time, or did that come later?
Yeah, we like buying the building and us, starting dating was like basically the same time. So it's all kind of together. Yeah.
That's very cool. And that can make or break a relationship. I think like doing a project like that is taxing. It's a little strenuous and stressful for sure.
Yeah.
My wife and I are renovating a building together right now, and it's had some challenges. So how did that go for you and your now wife?
Yeah, I think we look back on that time in a really positive light. Plenty of nights where we're just like drinking beer, bumper music, and just like working at the buildings or at the building. I think it's good. Now I think, learns a lot of lessons over time of like maybe not to work with a partner, have some professional separation, but for certainly in that time in that building, like it's good memories.
Is she still involved with the real estate that you're doing now, or has she moved on to do other things?
Yeah. So, I did maybe our first like 4 historic tax credit applications, and she has done, now like 30 since then, including for other developers. So yeah, she's kind of taken over that part of the business. But yeah, she's a historian, so, has her own independent work. She's a, published author, but yeah, so still a bit of her time is working with Kunst, but less now.
That's cool. So early on, were you doing a lot of reading about real estate, listening to podcasts to get inspiration? Were you doing things to kind of further your knowledge and education about how to do this project?
Yeah, I think a lot of it at the beginning was more on the construction side. and lucky to know a lot of good people in Cincinnati that were willing to help and were very helpful. Small general contractors, friends that were doing similar work. And I think that was a lot of the early learning. So, how do you set up contracts, lien waivers? Who should I call for this? And then just, like education by fire, I think, asking all the dumb questions. So, probably in 2012, I didn't know anything behind the drop, like in an apartment or, didn't know anything. So that was the main learning, I think, just learning a lot about construction with sort of mentors around me. And then, some research online, podcasts and stuff like that. But I think it's been a lot more education of like by pain and from people around me.
It's probably the best way. How did you find that general contractor to do the work with? Did you hire a general contractor, or were you functioning as your own GC?
Yeah. So for that first building, a friend of mine, he has now what's maybe like a 10-person sort of construction company in Cincinnati, same age, and he's been on maybe like a similar path. But so the idea was like we would partner on it. He would have some small equity. He would be like the GC or more like advisory GC, where I would be doing most of it and would help. So that was really useful. And then kind of as I quit my job, like took over more of that, where he was like consulting, I would say. And we were, technically the GC, and hired, a couple guys on Craigslist and just figured it out.
And then at what point did you get turned on to historic tax credits and pursuing those?
Yeah. So really from the first building, I think a friend of mine mentioned there's these historic tax credits. And so I, researched and went down the rabbit hole a bit and found a consultant. And I was like, what does it look like to hire you to do these tax credits? And he said, gave us fees and then sent me like PDFs, like this is what I would produce. And there was, like a 10-page PDF. I was like, I think I could just do this. Maybe I don't need to pay this guy. So basically I just did the first one. Fortunately it wasn't that competitive at that time, and we won tax credits on the first one, but like anything, from doing one, probably then knew more than, 80% of people, and then did the second one and just has not become like expertise. But
did you know, like when you bought the $5,000 building, that it would be a candidate for a historic tax credit?
Yeah, I don't think we probably would have done the building anyways, that first one. I think I kind of figured out through the process of like, I knew it was historic and maybe that was in a historic district, but figured out kind of through the process of like, okay, there's these tax credits and it would qualify, like, okay, I think that would make it financially better. So yeah, it wasn't part of the plan maybe initially, but came in.
So explain to our listeners, we've got mostly like kind of beginning, intermediate investors, exactly how a historic tax credit works and what the benefits are. Yeah.
So it's effectively the government trying to incentivize a very high level of historic preservation. I think coming out of the 50s, 60s, 70s, governments realized we should preserve some things. There's value in that. There is, character and all this stuff that's important about historic preservation. So basically, say it's $1 million of construction, the state of Ohio will give you 25% credit and the federal government 20%. So combined, say 45%, something like $450,000 on $1 million project. And that really is like a deduction of the taxes you would have to pay. So there's different ways to basically turn that into money. You can, sell the credits to people in Ohio. That credit is refundable. So if you can't use it, the state government will actually pay you that money. But yeah, so it ends up being like something 30 to 45% kind of discount on your construction.
So with the state, I was listening to your interview with Chris Powers that you did, and does the state actually send you a check for the amount of the 25% directly, like at tax time or, shortly after tax time? Is that how that works?
Yeah. The first project, we finished it and did all the paperwork, and then it was,
that was the $5,000 place that you bought. That was your first tax credit project, right?
Yep. I think the state credit was $35,000, but yeah, it was just direct deposit, like any, I guess, tax refund. I put in my bank information, and then one day I looked at it and was like, $35,000.
Pretty cool. Yeah. And then the federal is 20%, and that is a deduction from how does that work? It's not, because that's not a direct deposit into your bank account, correct?
Yeah. So it's basically, you have a $200,000 credit. So if your income qualified and you had a, $20,000 tax bill one year, you could just use a $20,000 of that credit instead. And so you pay basically no tax. So, it depends on the investor. It depends if you can use it on the first projects. And even now, like I can't personally use not that much federal tax liability, but, investors can often use them, or you can just, sell them to somebody that isn't even in the project that could use the credit. And that's how we do it now, basically.
So you're selling that credit to other investors that need to offset their income. Is that how that works?
Yeah, exactly.
And is there a secondary marketplace? How do you get connected with people that want to buy the tax credits?
Yeah, so there are some like lenders that can understand it. There isn't like a good secondary market. I think there probably could be is for a lot of these tax credits. There's new markets and low-income housing and all the stuff which trade, but it's very kind of opaque and hard to find ways to do it. But and the best way I've found is through like CPAs, tax people that have clients that can use them because they can help facilitate the sale and also can like understand it and explain it. So yeah, that's how I found. But you could sell it to someone you could do whatever. But and there are syndicators, people who do this as a job. But
and then when you sell them, you don't get $1 for $1. You sell it, as a percentage of that tax credit, like a little bit, I don't know, 80 or 90% of what the tax credit is worth.
Yeah, they're going to price in both like when they will get the tax benefit and also the risk of the project. Because their risk of buying the credit is project never gets done or you screw it up and you don't get the tax credit. So they're going to buy it at some rate that, that fair return. So anywhere from like 65 cents to, 85 cents, something like that.
And do you ever sell the credit before, like way before the project is finished? Like, will somebody take a risk on that? Or do they want to see it pretty far along in terms of completion to know that like, yeah, this thing's going to finish and I don't think I have too much risk here?
Yeah. I mean, you can sell it pretty early, even as part of like your initial equity or capital in the project. They're not going to put in all the money up front. So you might have an agreement to buy them, but only 25% of the money is in up front, 25% at, drywall complete, 25% occupancy, something. So, the actual payout is going to be mostly to sort of mitigate that risk.
So I want to talk about, at what point did you form your company, it's Kunst? Tell us what that word means and how you ended up, at what stage did you form the company?
Yeah. So we, bought the first building, end of 2013, working on it for a year. And then basically I quit my job and I was like, okay, I think let's actually build a company around this. So, like 2014, 15, formed the LLC, actually made it a company. So yeah, Kunst, it's a German word, just means art. The idea we're in over the Rhine, which was a very German neighborhood. All the buildings we developed, probably built, largely by German people or German speakers. So yeah, that was the main motivation. It was, a short name, domain, kunst.us was available, and just, a call to like German heritage and maybe my German heritage.
You do have some German heritage too?
Yeah. Yep. A lot of my family sort of on like the great grandparent level, was from Germany.
And so in Kunst, it means art.
Yeah. Like you'll see in Germany and sometimes in the US, you'll see like a Kunst house or something like that, which, like an art exhibit or art house.
Cool. And so when you structured the company, did you have in mind what kind of projects you were going to do? Did you know you were going to continue to do these, historic tax credits and over the Rhine, or did you have any other kind of vision for the company?
Yeah. So it was the idea, which has kind of come to be, is just more of what we had already done. So, finished that one building. It went reasonably well, first one. And then, basically that first building maybe raised $60,000. And then we did kind of two buildings at once and raised $200,000, but the same exact thing, like a quarter mile away. So historic tax credits, historic renovation, same thing. And that's what we've done on every building. So, yeah, I think in forming the company, the idea was we're just going to keep doing this and, do as much as we can in Cincinnati, and maybe at some point, the model works in other cities.
Tell us about Cincinnati. What is that market like? How do you like working there? Do you ever, you mentioned maybe expanding to other cities. What cities would also interest you?
Yeah. So, Cincinnati, I had never heard of it before I went to grad school there. Went to University of Cincinnati. I was there for 2 years. And yeah, really, I guess I would say fell in love with the place. For anybody that hasn't been, it's certainly worth, at least a long weekend. So yeah, it's a really beautiful historic city. It probably has the same environment. Maybe people have been to like Savannah or Charleston, where it's just like so much dense historic architecture. But then on top of that, it has very great restaurants, has, symphony and the opera, and Major League sports team, down Major League soccer team, like everything I think you want sort of an urban environment, and maybe at half the cost that you could find it in the coast. So it's just a really compelling place, I think, for that reason. And yeah, it has made it a good place to do real estate. It's not a booming market. We're not relying on this major influx and cap rate compression and all this crazy stuff. It's sort of like, it's stable. There's good employers downtown. P&G is there. Kroger is there. And it's a place. And I think in a recession, it's probably fine. And then the boom times, it's basically stable. So I think that's kind of the pitch. But yeah, I think there's other markets like that. I think Pittsburgh is probably a bit ahead. Nashville the same. But yeah, Louisville, Cleveland, in Detroit, I think there's a lot of development happening there. St. Louis, yeah, I think a lot of like cities in the Midwest where people live and want to live, and it doesn't really matter if they're going to be like booming or not.
So I mentioned I'm in Columbus, and I live in German Village, which is obviously a very German, influenced. And
yeah, that's a great neighborhood.
It sounds like Over the Rhine is as well, very heavily German influenced town. Why was that? How did that develop historically?
Yeah, I think, like now there's sort of chain migration. It starts with, a small group of people. And then once enough people go, that you can get a job, that largely you can still speak in German. I think there were 20 German language papers in Cincinnati. So, like a Chinatown or like anything now, you can go and it can be a version of where you came from, and you can get jobs and have a place. So, yeah, I think that's how it grew in Cincinnati, and all the architecture remains. And same obviously at German Village too. Lucky for that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's the exposed brick and the original hardwood floors. It's really hard to beat that. Is that something you initially fell in love with? And your future projects, you always try to find those kinds of homes and apartment projects to buy? Yeah,
the first one, it was in very bad shape, but two of the floors we held the original floors. So it's 150-year-old solid hardwood. It would be quite expensive to do now, and it's just already there. So you just had to sand and finish. Yeah, I think that's maybe a theme in all these buildings where it could seem really annoying and difficult and it's old, and why would you keep the old thing? Like, don't you want the new? And is new just better? And I think, oftentimes it is. I think insulation and soundproofing and so many things that we've invented have made our lives better. But I think a lot of the original stuff is quite good. It's old growth trees that are very expensive now. It's a custom decorated plaster molding. It's a ivory handle on the door, like whatever it is, it's already there and it's beautiful. So why not keep it?
Yeah, you can't recreate the soul of old stuff. I had Eric Weatherholtz on the show, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he was talking about the Easton, which is a project in Columbus, and it's a great outdoor development, really well done, but it doesn't compare it to like the history and the tradition that is in German Village and the old brick homes and the brick roads. Like, you just cannot recreate that with new, as hard as you try.
Yeah. And I think, that does come through with renters, a way to drive returns and to do well in real estate is create something that's differentiated. That's nice. That's high quality. And I think that's already just there with an old building. You just kind of need to bring it back to life. So you don't have to be that really. You just sort of have to give a little care to what was there.
In doing my research for the interview, I saw that you also published a magazine called Kunst. Well, talk about that. What was the inspiration to do that?
Yeah, so we, my wife and I, we got a grant to do Kunst magazine, and Yeah, I think it was a mix at the time. I don't know if I thought it would be like good marketing or just a cool like side project. But yeah, we created 2 issues. We're just trying to tell the story of other people doing things like us, renovating and adding over the Rhine, people building and creating, the artists. So it was more like a side passion project. When we sold them and we maybe broke even on it, it wasn't ever meant to be a business or anything, but it was just kind of a fun thing to do.
That's cool. And you would focus on like local developers or guys like you doing similar projects strictly in over the Rhine?
Yeah, pretty much just over the Rhine or downtown. We did a craftsmanship issue, and then I think the other was a preservation issue. But the craftsmanship one, we went out to Indiana. Guy who was doing all this custom millwork. He had like 300, knives for different molding trims and all this stuff. And so we photographed his shop, with a photographer. And so it was stuff like that, just trying to tell the story of people, that cared about what they were doing, cool things.
That's awesome. I wanted to go back to that first project. Once you completed it, how long did it take to complete it? Because it's a pretty big project to do a renovation like you're doing. How long did that take? And then what was the next step in terms of renting them? Did you move in? What happened next?
Yeah, so it was about 18 months from purchase to occupancy. So we created the 3 apartments. We got the tax credits. We also got a property tax abatement. There was never an idea. We thought maybe to live there, but it wasn't really in mind. But good friends of ours lived there, which, potentially was challenging, especially when the fires went out in the winter. And also that, we thought the project was done. We said, yeah, you can move in. And, I agreed. All right. And they were living with a friend and said, actually it's February. And I got pushed back a few months. Yeah. I think until June or so. So, renting to friends. So the idea with that building and really with all of our buildings, like we're going to rent it out, I don't know, forever. But if at some point it makes sense to sell it, the price is good, depending on our situation, our investors, like we'll sell. And so, we owned that building once it was done for 3 years and then sold it.
So how does that work with both the historic tax credit and you mentioned the tax abatement? Does the new owner benefit from those at all or no?
So the tax abatement does transfer, property tax abatement. The tax credits typically do not. So after occupancy, the ownership is locked in. So you can't sell them. You can't sell the building with the credits. So they say like subject to recapture. So the federal credit, technically they could come in. If you sold it in year 3 and the credits left for 5 years, they could take 2 years of those credits. So in that case, I think we probably had a year left on the federal credit, but we hadn't used all of it anyways. And so it doesn't really matter.
Gotcha. So the next project, I wanted to hear how you structure. Do you structure each project as an individual LLC with your limited partners? How do you do that? Is each one a separate project, or do you have like a fund that you're doing?
Yeah. So for the first 6 years, it was, the syndication model. Each one is a separate building, separate LLC, separate investor group, like equity split, fees, all that. So each building was really independent, which I think is good, to be siloed, but also it does create complexity. You have to do tax returns for every LLC. You have to have a bank account for everybody else and all that, accounting, probably for each one. So that's what we did basically for the first 5 years. And so, for the second project, it was really 2 buildings at once that were right next to each other. And those are 2 separate LLCs, 2 separate investor groups. Yeah. And that was the model for the first 5 years. In the last 2 or 3 years,
So you were doing the project management, whatever you want to call it. You're doing the leasing, managing the project itself or leasing them. And you're also doing the accounting side of it. Did that get too complicated at some point? Do you manage all of that in-house, or do you have any third parties that come in to help you with that?
Yeah. So I think a key lesson has been, I think it's attractive to be scrappy. And I think that's really important. And, I did all the bookkeeping, and we were at the GC doing a lot of labor. We were the property manager for the first 5 years of the business. And I think that can seem interesting, and maybe collect fees from that, and maybe pay someone that's overpaid, like all this stuff. But, ultimately, like, it doesn't make sense for you as the owner, or even probably internal to your company, to be, doing the accounting and taxes. Like, there are people that do that. They're highly optimized to do it, and it's worth it to pay them. The same thing with property management. You'll be lucky if you can build one business well. So you certainly can't build like 4 businesses well at once. So over time, kind of, learn from that and have done less and less. So right now, I'd say we're truly like developer, tax credits, and general contractor. That's enough.
So what's an average day look like for you right now?
Yeah, so it's probably like 50%, I would say, financial, including like investors, current investors, pension investors, the opportunities on compliance, potentially selling tax credits, finance. So I think that's a lot of it. And 25% might be like, I would say, development, which is permitting, design, architects, everything basically from purchase until occupancy. And then 25% is probably construction. We're the GC, we do, a fair bit of construction. So yeah, just like monitoring that, but, mostly Gmail, Excel.
And you're into Notion too. I saw maybe you're.
Yeah, that's been a lifesaver. We use it for invoicing, and it's like absolutely fantastic for that purpose, at least in our use case.
Strictly for invoicing?
Yeah, we use it for everything. I mean, now it's sort of like our wiki, our internal wiki. So, in the ideal case, any function that we're doing will have a place in there. So, if I would send you an email and say like, hey, Patrick, can you, pay our accounting bill this month, or pay our, tax bill? I'd say it's number 3.2 in our wiki. Just look, you watch a Loom video, and you know how to do it, and if you had never done it before. So that's how we try to use it, as like a wiki resource where we store our information, EIN numbers, kind of stuff like that. And then accounts payable and our daily construction reports.
And then what's the company look like right now in terms of employees? How many employees do you have helping you do all of this?
Yeah, so there's me, my wife, who is partner in the business, works on the tax credits. And then we have a director of construction, project manager, and superintendent. That's kind of our construction team of 3 people. Then we have like an accountant keeping all the books. And then we have like part-time finance guy who is working on the loans, tax credits, opportunity zone, all that. So that's kind of our internal team. And then, of course, work with lawyers and accountants and all that.
What's the competition like for the historic tax credits? What's that process like? Is there just a certain amount in like the area that you're working in over the Rhine? Is there just a certain amount of credits that are given per year? What is that process like? Yeah,
so I would say for the properties, are we competing to buy properties? I think yes, but it's much less competitive because it's old buildings, it's restoration. You have a historic conservation board that's going to oversee your project. It's going to have an opinion on what you do on the exterior. So there's a lot of like headaches that don't exist in a lot of real estate. So I think that is potentially, you can get past that, like to our advantage, where it's just a bit less competitive to buy. And then the credits themselves, the federal credit is not competitive. And so, typically if you apply, you'll get them if your building qualifies and you do the right work. The state credit is competitive in Ohio. And so there's, a certain pool of money, and all the projects in Ohio competing, projects in Columbus and Cleveland and everywhere else. So yeah, you can basically apply twice a year, and each of those rounds is competitive with all the other projects applying at the same time.
Now, are you doing the application after you've made the purchase of the building? Would that, like, if you don't get the tax credit, it's obviously going to affect your numbers. Does that happen ever where you've bought the building, you've done the application, but you aren't given the tax credit?
Yeah, there is some risk there. Buy the building, don't get the tax credits, then, what would you do? Potentially have to sell the building. So fortunately we've gotten the credits on every project. I would say it's near 100% chance we'll get them eventually. Maybe have to apply twice. Worst case, maybe 3 times. But there is that risk. But yeah, so you basically have to get the credit before you start construction. So we wouldn't start on project, invest a ton of money, be halfway through construction, and then find out we can't get the credits. Like that would never happen, but it's possible.
So you're granted the credit prior to even doing any demo or anything on the building.
Yeah, and you actually have to be. I mean, they want to make sure that you haven't torn out the beautiful, medallion plaster ceiling and then applied for credits afterwards. So they don't want you to do anything until it's black.
Now, do they walk the project with you to take a look at it, or are you just sending photos in, or how does that process work for you?
Yeah, so the whole thing is just photo based. So you take tons of photos, and then you have like a photo key, so they know where they are in the building and what they're looking at. So they sit in Columbus. They have the right, I think, to come inspect the project at any time. But they have so many projects that we've probably had like 4 site visits, in 7 years, something like that.
And what's it like working with the Over the Rhine, the Historic Association?
Yeah, so they're, in Cincinnati, they have this historic conservation board, which, they kind of govern Over the Rhine. They govern any like registered historic building in Cincinnati. And in my experience, like, they're great because they're headed by a person who knows what they're doing. So they kind of have like a single point person that's going to review the project and review everything and have a, somewhat impartial opinion. And then the board, like by statute, is made up of like a developer, a finance person, a historian. They have like the qualifications for, I think, the 5 people on the board. And so they come at it from all angles. And they end up, I think, being pretty fair. So yeah, you have to get all your work approved. They're 100% annoyances there, but they end up being quite reasonable.
Just for my own selfish reasons, I want to know, like, I'm in German Village, and I don't know if you're familiar with Franklinton, which is in another kind of historic area that's getting fixed up outside of Columbus. How do I find out if something is available for a tax credit or if it's not? Like, German Village is obviously a historic district, but I don't know if my house is available for that. I've got an office building that I'm working on, and I'm not sure if that's available for a tax credit. How do I find that out? Or any investor find that out?
I think the best way is probably, either if you have this like historic conservation board, like a local governing body that deals with historic, ask them, or like a nonprofit, like in Cincinnati, we have Cincinnati Preservation Association, and they would be a good resource. But basically it's like, there's a National Historic District. There's a map for that. I think German Village is as well. And, as long as your building is within that, it qualifies. So, there are ways you could probably go, like, figure it out, do research and libraries. But I think the easiest would be like local conservation board or historic group.
And in general, you've got to apply for the credit before you begin any kind of work, correct?
Yep. And even be awarded the credit before you do anything.
Right. And are there oftentimes that you've seen people do work on a building that they would have been eligible for a tax credit, but they don't apply for it, and they miss out on whatever 20 or to 45% of a credit on the project? Does that happen often? Yeah,
I think it probably happens all the time in Over the Rhine.
And is that just because they don't want to mess with it?
Yeah, don't know about it, don't want to mess with it, which I can get. I mean, there is an efficiency of just doing the project, kind of getting it done, not dealing with all this stuff. So I definitely get that. But I imagine it's more like lack of knowledge, or they don't know it's available, or the benefit of it. Because I'm sure of all the buildings renovated in Over the Rhine in the last 20 years, maybe 25% of them have gotten tax credit. So I think the most don't, they could.
So my favorite beer is Rheingeist, and that the building is in Over the Rhine. What was that a project that was a historic tax credit project?
I don't think they did. I know that they started with a lease, and so they didn't own the building. I think they were just doing like the leaseholder improvements, putting all the tanks and everything in there, and then they bought the building like year 4 of operation. So I imagine that even if they had known about the credits, it probably wouldn't have quite worked like how they did it.
Yeah,
but it's a great historic renovation.
Yeah, it's an awesome building. It's a great area. So you did that first project. How many have you done to date? It sounded like quite a few at this point.
Yeah, so we've completed and sold 4 buildings, like 20 units. We have 3 that are under construction that are about 40 units, and then we have 2 probably upcoming that would be about 30. So we're only at like 100 units total. So it's quite small.
And how do you decide whether to keep or to sell a project once it's finished?
Yeah, well, so I think, maybe something we'll talk about is like, what's a controversial thing? I think real estate operators want to have the idea of like, I'm a long-term owner. I'm going to own this property forever. It's like a multi-generational thing. And that's great. But like selling real estate is also very great. I think if you're a real estate investor, if you already have a lot of capital, yes, investing in real estate forever makes sense. If you're an operator and you like relatively don't have, that much capital, I think selling can make sense. So, I've become much more like interested, I would say, generally in selling and, put it on the market, see what the price is, see what the returns would be. You're not a forced seller. Your debt doesn't requirement. You're not in strain, but if someone makes a great offer and you can make a lot of money on it, then sell and build a business.
And you've done that in 3 cases? Is that what I've heard?
Yeah. And we're selling another building now, so that would be the 4th.
Okay. And then do you do a 1031 exchange at that point, or are you using the funds as operating funds to do more projects? What do you do at that point?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the money has gone then into following projects. So, trying to build up some skill that way as well.
So you don't really have an exit strategy for each project. It kind of depends how things unfold and how they develop. If you get a good offer, maybe you'll consider selling it. Otherwise, just consider renting the units. Yeah.
We have long-term debt, and the tax credits will typically require own the buildings for at least 5 years. Now we've been doing a bit of opportunities on investing, so I would typically, want to own the buildings for 10 plus years. So we have some we're pretty longer term oriented in general, but if it makes sense to sell, well, we would sell it.
And then do the LPs, do they get much say in that, or is that your decision as the general partner? How does that work?
Yeah, it's been a mix over time. Some projects I would say I don't have that much control. Like legally no control to sell the buildings, and so then it's kind of totally up to the LPs. I think on other ones, even if I have the control, I certainly wouldn't sell it. Our investors didn't want to, or if we couldn't set up some, 1031 exchange, like you said, or opportunity to them. So, I think it's more like, do we all agree on this? Yeah.
I want to talk about raising capital. How you talked about cobbling together, the money for the first project. Have those investors stuck with you? Have you sought out new investors? What's it been like raising capital for these projects?
Yeah. So on the first building, all those investors are still invested with us. So now almost 10 years, probably. So that's been good. And then, kind of always like an expanding group, larger capital amounts, start with maybe like local business people that have been successful. And then, frankly, through Twitter and networking have kind of expanded that to, New York, West Coast, people who have sold companies, people who did really well in tech, or, the company IPOing, something like that. The group has expanded. I think we have, lifetime, maybe 50 investors. An average investment is probably $200,000, something like that.
Did you know that we have an awesome free investing newsletter in addition to this podcast? We have over 30,000 people reading the newsletter daily, so some of you are already subscribed, but that's a lot fewer than the 100 million podcast downloads we've done to date. If you're one of those 99,970,000 people who have listened to our podcast and aren't subscribed to our newsletter, join for free today by simply clicking the link in the pop-up on this video and then entering your email. In just 5 minutes a day, you can stay up to date with what's going on with your money and the financial world. Join over 30,000 other readers now by simply clicking the link in the pop-up in this video and then entering your email.
And how has Twitter affected your business?
Yeah, I just, at the kind of start of COVID, I was like, I just kept hearing, I think in podcasts and, online, whatever, people like, yeah, Twitter is such a powerful force. It's helped my business, whatever. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to post every day. I don't really have an idea of what this will do, but that's my commitment. I'm just going to post every day and see what happens. So yeah, it's been pretty crazy. I think relative to like my network I could create otherwise, the wealth in my world without Twitter, like it's absolutely life changing. I probably the only reason, maybe, about me. And yeah, crazy. You just get exposed to people building really big businesses that if you message them or they see you, and it just builds the trust. So, it's a pretty amazing thing. It changed my life, I think.
Do you also use it as a venue for learning? Do you learn a lot from real estate Twitter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, try to follow like a small group that I think is highly valuable. As much as I love Twitter, I try not to, be too much on it, I guess. But yeah, there are some really fascinating people. I mean, just the basics of like, what's a fair fee structure? What's a fair like split with investors? I mean, if I had known some of that stuff, 3 years earlier, it would have probably changed my life, my business. And it's stuff that's just there for free, and all these years of experience and mistakes that people have made. So it's really a valuable thing. So yeah, I've gained a lot, and I still gain a lot. And people will post stuff on there that I should have known. Unlevered yield on cost, like a pretty basic sort of real estate metric. I probably first learned like 2 years just from following people. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Can you explain what that is for our listeners that don't know what it is?
Yeah, basically. So, there's like a cap rate. It's like basically the same thing. You have your total cost into a project. If it costs $1 million, and then you have like your net operating income that comes from that project. Basically like cash that's going to come out of it, excluding your loan and, like capital expenditure stuff. So, it's basically a way of like figuring out the multiple of the building. And so, the higher the cap rate, the better, because you're buying it at a lower multiple. So when the market's very frothy, 4% cap rate, it means you're buying it at like a 25 times multiple on its net operating income. And so, higher cap rate effectively is better. But, the idea of like, okay, you have this total investment in, you're going to have this sort of like singular number that's going to somewhat determine if it's a good investment or not. That's basically like your unlevered yield on cost is like the same thing as like a stabilized cap rate, the data product is that.
Do you have any other metrics that you look at before when you go into a project to determine if it's a go or no go decision on buying it?
Yeah, I think that's the main one, is sort of like green light, red light. But there's other like sanity checks. Like what percentage of your rents comes as your net operating income. If that number's too high, if you have 90% of your net operating income against your rents, then probably your expenses are too low. You're missing something. You're not properly guessing the tax, like property taxes you'll be paying. So that, like, what's that percentage? I think for us, it's, in the range of like 25, 30%, like our expenses of our rents. So it's more like sanity checks like that. Debt service coverage, I think that's, very critical. I think people get interested in like loan to cost, loan to value, all that's important, but it's sort of, the main thing is like, can you make your fund payment? Even if your rents drop. So I think that's important. And we do look at long-term returns. I think it's always hard to guess, like, what's the building going to sell for in year 5? What's your interest rate in year 7? Like, all that stuff everyone is guessing. But we do project it out like 5 or 10 years and just see like what the annual return will be as well.
Moses Kagan had this post a while back about just advice that you or he or, Eric Weatherholtz or a Sean Sweeney would give to somebody, just starting in real estate. For somebody that is interested in doing what you're doing historic renovations, using historic tax credits, what's the best advice you have for them on how to get started doing something like that?
Yeah, I think that, the advice for probably starting any business is like, you do kind of just have to start. But I don't think that has to be very large. You don't have to raise $1 million out of the gate. If you have a duplex, if you buy a condo, if you own a single unit, like, okay, what does it look like to redo the kitchen? And like, okay, you have to hire a plumber. You have to hire. So I think you can do like a very simple version of whatever it is you want to do and just get started. So I think that's good. And then, I think one mistake I've made and I still see maybe online is like the idea of you don't need fees. You can just have it all in the equity, have some split with your investors. And that's the way you stay totally aligned. And that's just like absolutely wrong. There's no company on earth that was built without revenue, that was built without employees, that was built without, money coming in the door. And it's actually very bad for your investors if you don't have that. If you can't hire an accountant and the books are a mess, like that's very bad, so like, yes, you need to pay for that. And it's
so did you structure things without talk about that? You said you made a mistake. What was the mistake that you made exactly?
Yeah, frankly, I didn't even know there was such thing as a developer fee until probably 2 or 3 years ago. Like, what does a developer do? And I'm like, yeah, everything that happens, putting the entire project together, getting, hiring the architects, working with them, like, billions and billions of value created basically just by developers. So yeah, I think the mistake is like early on, I was like, we don't need fees. I'll get it in the project. It'll come at the same time as the investor. But yeah, with that, like wasn't able to hire a construction project manager. I did the accounting and the taxes, like, we just didn't have the right fee structure at the beginning. And then I think it definitely, has hurt us. So
would you say it just slowed down the growth that you could have had?
Yeah, exactly.
Made it more complicated and burden, kind of a burden for you to handle all of it.
Yeah. And if the projects take longer because you don't have the right people, that's also bad for you and for the investors. And you're much better off collecting fair fees and getting a project done in 14 months rather than not and getting it done in 20 months. People get upset, it hurts the returns. And so, yeah, just charge fair fees and hire people. Yeah.
And as far as advice, you would recommend doing what you did, like buy a I don't know if these are available anymore, a $5,000 or $10,000 project and just learn by doing.
Yeah. And it's, I think a lesson in both directions is like a 20 unit building is not that much harder than a 3 unit building. A 100 unit building is not that much harder than a 20 unit building. Like, there are new challenges, but, you would learn a ton by, building a guest house onto your house and renting it out on Airbnb, or, buying a downtown condo that you're going to use, but, you're going to fix up the kitchen, you're going to paint, and you're going to, rent it out, or your kids can use it when they're in town. Like whatever the smallest version is, spend $10,000, spend $20,000, like whatever and just like start. I think that's the best.
And it's a great way to see if you like it or not.
Yeah. And maybe from that one, you're like, oh, this is terrible. And you haven't lost that much money. You have this thing that you could easily sell. You don't have to go like full bore and try to raise $500,000. And yeah, you could, but you don't have to.
Right. Just kind of a low cost experiment.
Yeah.
I wanted to segue into talking about pickleball. I know that you were a college swimmer, but now you really got into pickleball. You started a meetup group in Cincinnati, I believe, that has like 750 members. How'd you get into pickleball initially?
So in July, a friend of mine from Austin, basically introduced me. I'd never heard of it before. And he'd been telling me about it for a bit, because in Austin, that's where all the cool things are. So yeah, we played over 4th of July, and it was just, I think the magical thing about it is like, it was just so obvious. Like, oh yeah, I get this. Like it was fun the first time. It was the right amount of sort of like physicality. And so, yeah, I don't know if I mentioned, but I did actually move to New York City a year and a half ago. And so, often commuting back to Cincinnati, we still have our team there and still buying stuff there. But, so yeah, been playing a lot of pickleball in New York, started a meetup, and it's great.
So I didn't realize you're living in New York City. How often are you going back to Cincinnati?
Yeah, pretty much like once a month. We have, 3 people there and they're on site every day. We have our daily reports. So yeah, you definitely need to be on site every day for construction. But yeah, I go back like once a month.
Awesome. I don't know if you've heard about this thing. It's called the Ace Pickleball Club, and it's modeled after Top Golf. I don't know if you've looked into that. I started like doing some preliminary research on the franchise fee, and it just seems really cool. Like just pickleball is awesome. You combine it with good food and drinks. It could be a pretty good business model.
Yeah. Of course you're thinking of like the real estate side of it, same as I am, of like, what does that look like? You have this activity that's very popular. What's sort of the real estate angle of that? And I think there's going to be a lot of versions. There's like, more suburban, 20 courts, restaurant, bar, all that. And then I think there's just going to be a lot of different models, clubs and, private shops and all that. I
even saw an article today on my Google feed about pickleball courts in like not abandoned malls, but malls that are not doing too well. They'll put the pickleball courts like in the corridor of a mall, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, they got the space. People want to play. There's not a lot of places to play. So yeah, it's pretty wild. We'll see where it goes. Who knows, 10 years. But.
Yeah. I mean, it's the fastest growing sport in the US, or I guess I don't know if in the world or what, but it's absolutely growing by leaps and bounds. So
yeah.
I wanted to ask about your why. What's your why that keeps you going when the grind of real estate starts to wear on you? The projects you're doing, I've done some to that degree, not to the degree that you're doing them, but they can be rough. They can be a tough, long slog. What's your why, and what are some ways you do to kind of like recharge?
Yeah. So I think in its best days, real estate is like unambiguous that it's important and that it's interesting. I think there's lots of businesses where on a down day, like, is this even important? Like, I have this app with photo sending. Does anyone even care? But creating homes, creating places where people work and restaurants, like where people spend their lives, is sort of like unambiguously. So I think that's like a source of motivation, even in the down days. So yeah, real estate's always going to be part of my life. I think, I am interested in starting businesses, different kinds of businesses. There's lots of different paths to take, but I just think, a physical space where people are like joyful, that's like a very worthy way to spend a life. So yeah, I think that's kind of what keeps me on.
That's cool. And then where do you see your company Kunst going in the next 5, 10, 15 years? What would you like to see develop?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting time in the market. I think obviously like debt and equity, debt more expensive. I think people are probably a little more wary to invest. So, we have our current projects. We'll probably buy 1 or 2 projects soon, and focus on getting those done, doing well on those for the next year, and then seeing what it looks like after that. Seeing where the market is, if it's maybe raising a larger fund. I think that's interesting. Yeah, we're on pause for a little bit. Not sure, but yeah, I think, there's a lot of opportunity. I do think in almost every market in the US and maybe beyond that, like historic buildings, historic preservation, we were talking the office conversion, office to residential. I think it's a niche of real estate that's like quite painful. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Interesting.
And what you're doing with the historic tax credits, would that skill and ability would transfer to any city, correct? I mean, the process is the same, whether you're in Cincinnati or Pittsburgh or Tampa or whatever. Yeah.
The federal program is in the entire country, and then each state or most states have their own state program. So yeah, it applies everywhere. And it's like anything, didn't intend this to be the business, but it's just become our expertise. We've probably done more projects, more tax credit projects than, I don't know, maybe almost anyone in Ohio. So yeah, we have the expertise, and I think it works a lot of places.
And if somebody wanted to learn more about historic tax credits, is there a good source you could point them towards, a website or podcast or anything that is out there?
Yeah, this, people ask, and there aren't a lot. I think maybe I should have done more like writing or creating resources. Maybe I still should, but yeah, you mentioned the interview with Chris Powers. I hate to, plug me out and think, but basically me just talking for an hour of tax credits. I think, obviously this interview will be like a good resource. So I think those are good. And then, each state has their own website, and I find the state websites are much better. The federal website is, federal website. It's not that useful. So yeah, I'd say those are kind of the best ones.
But the state of Ohio, like you could figure out all the guidelines and just how the program works in general. Yeah.
And I would say like, the people in the state, at least in Ohio, like they want you to get the credits. The whole point of the program is to renovate these buildings well. And so like me, if you didn't know what you were doing on the first application, like they're very helpful. There's no mistake that would be disastrous. Like they'll just kind of walk you through it. There's revisions and amendments and all that stuff. So, yeah, they're very helpful.
That's great. I've always kind of dreaded going to the city for plan approval and that kind of stuff, but it sounds like you've had a pretty good experience. So that's awesome. I wanted to jump into a
and
quick...
even the city.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, even the city. I mean, the building department, I think it's not the case in all municipalities, but in Cincinnati, like, they want projects to happen. Their whole purpose is that, development is happening. And so, we've had plenty of times of just like reaching out directly to the head of the building department. He's like, yeah, I'll take the call. You meet with him for 40 minutes, you go through the issue and, get resolved. So, government can be very helpful when it
really helpful when you can make a phone call like that and figure out the answers to your questions.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump into a quick fire round here before we wrap up. And I've got 3 or 4 questions that I wanted to put you in the hot seat on. So first one is your favorite Twitter account.
Yeah. So I don't know if you follow Bobby. He's like the Bill James of the architecture floor plans.
Bobby Fion, I just had him on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's great. It is so bizarre to me. He seems to understand like how much money is generated in the floor plans, like the unit size, the bedroom size, the number of bedrooms, like all that goes into creating a space. Like that's actually where most of the money is. And like, it's not taken that seriously, I think, in general. So I think it's cool that he like takes it that seriously and has like a very analytical.
Yeah, he basically said like floor plans are almost like an afterthought for a lot of developers, which seems crazy to me. And what he's doing is just like mapping, like creating this proprietary database of all the floor plans that he can gather and figuring out how to maximize what works and what doesn't to maximize rents.
Yep. And it can be small, pretty low cost things. Yeah, I think for most people, it's like you have a 600 square foot 1 bedroom. And that's like where the math stops. But, the difference between whatever, a 12 foot wide living room and a 14 foot wide living room might be $80 a month in rent. And that's like, hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate value.
Yeah. You should check out his episode. Check it out. I think it was a really good one. He's super smart guy, like really fascinating to talk to.
Yeah, I will. I haven't seen.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Second one, most impactful book.
Yeah, so I think there's 2. I read less sort of business books now. I just get a little too bored, I think. But How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's a class that I read last or 2 years ago. And that's really good at just basically how to work with people and not be a jerk, I think. But yeah, I mostly read more fiction, sci-fi, stuff like that. And so I like War of the Worlds, like 1890s sci-fi. Okay.
Very cool. So the author is who is that? That's
George Orwell, H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, that's right. We mentioned controversial opinion that you have. Do you have any other controversial opinions about real estate that others may not share?
Yeah, so I think my one, like selling can be good. Don't let people tell you otherwise. Yeah, I think fair fees. I think that's not controversial, but I do think there's a weird belief of like the operator, charging too much fees and stuff, trying to build a company. So yeah, what else besides that? I think, probably the preservation, just, historic buildings are good. It probably, actually, I would say like my strong belief in historic preservation is pretty counter, I think, to most in a way that I don't quite understand. I think to me, it's pretty obvious of like, if you were walking through Paris, I think 92% of people would be like, this is so cool. But they don't quite understand why. And they don't realize that like, that only exists because of like, let's say militant historic preservation.
Right.
And so, I'm not an absolutist. I think there's plenty of buildings that, can and could be torn down and redeveloped and all that. But in general, like I'm very far on the side of pro preservation.
And we're lucky that the tax code actually incentivizes it to some degree.
Yeah. And I think it's like the perfect kind of sort of government intervention. They're not going to overregulate and say, hey, in this area, you need to keep, make out a law that you have to keep all the original windows like that. Insane. But if they're going to incentivize it, they're going to provide this tax break. If you kind of do this above and beyond historic preservation, I think is like the perfect sort of government intervention to create like.
Okay. Fourth question is, I mentioned I'm renovating this. It's an office building that we started peeling back the drywall and realized we had a ton of exposed brick walls in this building.
Yeah.
And the brick's it's in pretty good shape. The mortar needs some work. How do I match up the new mortar to match up the old stuff that's over 100 years old? I cannot get that done. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. So a few ideas. The one is like on the first building, we had the same exact problem, and we were taking the historic tax credit very seriously, and you have to match the mortar. And so we tried all this different stuff, custom mortar, custom mixes. I mean, what ended up working is like we used like a wet toothbrush, and we just kind of were wiping the brick and then the mortar. And so it kind of was just like a mortar that was closed, but then once you kind of aged it and brought the brick color into it, so, that might not work really at a scale, but wet toothbrush, brick, mortar, that kind of worked. But there are companies that do custom mortar. There's a company in England that we use where you send them a sample and then they send you back the exact mortar color. That can be quite expensive, but that would probably like the proper way to do it. And then the final way, which I've only recently discovered, is like an acid wash, where you're going to do like a mortar kind of as close as possible, brick as close as possible if you're repairing that, but then you're doing like an acid wash that kind of like blends.
That's what we do, like a muriatic acid wash. That's not fun to do, but it's. The brick looks amazing afterwards. So
yeah,
it's well worth it. Do you ever paint brick, or is that like just a sin to you?
I like it personally, but the historic reviewers typically don't like it, and so we've done facades, and that ends up looking really nice. But yeah, like interior, we typically aren't allowed to.
Cool. John, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time today. For our listeners that want to learn more about you or to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Twitter's probably the best. John J. Blatchford, I think, on Twitter. And I think I've responded to every DM I've ever gotten. I try to be helpful to people, and I'm grateful for people that have been helpful to me. And so if I can help anyone or provide any sort of guidance, I'm happy to. So I think Twitter's the best way.
Okay, cool. John, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Millennial Investing. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast feed using the link here on the screen. This really helps support the show so that we can continue to provide this content to you for free. We appreciate you being listeners, and I hope to see you again next time.
Nonsense. Friggin' nonsense. I've now lived through 2 of these episodes. So the first one being that building. And then the second one being in 2020 during COVID with a much, much larger portfolio. Just to give your listeners some context, we own $200 million worth of buildings now, 50 something apartment buildings in Los Angeles.